Yeah, we can. I'll take a look at that, but I'll get that hoop for you in the next couple of days.
We're on.
Am I on?
Yeah.
I can't see what I'm doing, Eddie. You took away my screen.
You
Can you work on it from there?
go. Yeah.
Okay. Good afternoon. Welcome to another episode of Sewing Badly with Brent. Again, we're lacking Becky, who actually makes the show, so you have to put up with me. And I think we got our technical difficulties from last week sorted, though we are working on one monitor instead of two, but that will be sorted shortly. So, glad you all joined us. We've got lots of stuff to cover today. We're going to do some more sewing badly, I guess, is what we call it. But first off, let's get into some of the new stuff that came in. Do we have people watching? We do have people watching. Okay. We haven't scared them off from last week. So, what came in? We've got Meadowmere came in from Moda. So, very pretty. If you saw the Ruby Star Society stuff that we had come in the fall, this is not Ruby Star, but this is very similar to that collection. So we're probably going to put it on the shelf right next to it, but it's very pretty. It's got a little bit of metallic. That's your white. This one is just a very pretty, just some bugs and some nice gold, a very nice kind of outdoorsy look. And here's some more butterflies. This is I think this is one of those that's going to go fairly quick. This is a really nice butterfly, but the metallic in it, nice background. Here's some more. And like I said, if you know the Ruby Star stuff I'm talking about, a lot of this is very similar to it, so it's going to look really nice, all of it together. There's that, and mushrooms, because my wife loves mushrooms, so I thought I would get some fabric so I could make her something. She doesn't like mushrooms. I'm saying that so she watches it, she'll be mad. And this is the whole reason I bought the collection, is this piece right here. Just some really gorgeous kind of stylized bumblebees. And it all is really nice. I don't have a project yet for this one, but stay tuned. We'll probably have something coming up fairly soon for that. So that came in. And the other piece that came in is, well, this is just some white grunge, but it goes really well with it, and we're going to be using it today, so I just threw it on the stack. But there's this really cool kind of southwestern, it's called Whimsical West from Three Wishes. And you can see from the skulls, we got cacti. Cacti is plural for cactus, right? Am I right in that, Eddie? You look confused.
I think that's right.
And you got some interesting, some Midwestern animals, some foxes and buffaloes, and I guess they're bison and longhorn. Not at all New Englandy, but I like it, so there's that. And some really nice horses. They're upside down. They're not unicorns, though when I first saw them, I'm like, they could go with unicorns because of the colors. And y'all know how I feel about unicorns. And then here's this nice kind of a dream catcher print. And all of it to go with this panel. Doo-doo-doo. And there's that panel. And I'm looking at that and I'm thinking that I've got some cutting I need to do on that. But there's the panel. All right, so that's the Whimsical West. Now, today we're actually going to be starting on a sample for this, but the thing that came in that Brenda was super duper excited about, and honestly, the box alone gets me excited, because look at that, and it's like a little book. You see, you put it on your shelf. It's got this whole like book thing going on. It's called Jane Austen's House. So this whole thing is a kit, and what you get, and so it's going to make this quilt. So it's got these little diamonds. It even has your the template you need for it, and then the fabric itself is just absolutely gorgeous. And I think we've only got like 5 or 6 of these kits. So if this is something that you really like, you're going to want to jump on it. And now it is a kit, but what's nice is, say you didn't want to make this, I don't think there's any fabric cut in here that's less than 3/8 of a yard. I could look at the requirements, but so if you weren't like super into what this is going to make, the cuts in here are big enough that you could do some really interesting something else if you wanted to, and just call it a box of fabric. But the instructions are there, the fabric is gorgeous, and it comes in this really cool box. You can see, like, and then what's really nice is you can put it up on the shelf, and it looks like a book. So if you have to hide your fabric from the quilt police, that's where you put it. So that's all the new stuff that came in. I believe it should be on, I think at least the fabric is on the website. I don't know if we have the kit up there yet, but that is new. That all just came in yesterday, which is a good thing because I was trying to figure out what are we going to do for the show tomorrow. And then I'm like, well, the fabric came in, so why don't we just do some more bad sewing, and then we're going to actually sew the kit for the Whimsical West. The kit is going to be... Are you doing fanciness for me, Eddie? That's not what I want. I want the other page. The kit is actually going to be $69 or around $70 when we get it all cut up and ready to go. And this is what it's going to make. And the reason I wanted to kind of cover this today, there's a couple things that when I was going through the design on this, that I thought that if you're going to actually make this, you might want to do. Because one of the things the first thing that I often will get asked when people are doing a kit like this is getting your panel cut to the proper size in the middle. So we're going to cover that a little bit today. And the other thing on this kit, if you look at the directions, there's a lot of directional fabric to this in this kit or in this quilt. And one thing that I noticed was the fact that they did not use these horses. If we go over here, these horses are your outer border. And they don't, and everything else is cut to be directional except this outer border. So I was going to also cover today how to cut this so that you can keep it directionally, keep the direction going for this quilt, because there's enough of it here. You have to do a little bit of extra piecing, but not a lot, to make sure that all the horses' heads go up, so it matches everything else that's directional in the quilt. If you were to cut this like it shows you in the pattern, what you're going to end up with is the, let's see, the top and bottom borders are going to be, they're going to be sideways. So we're going to cover that today, how to cut that to make sure that that's going to fit. And then there's some other good stuff, you know, basic strip techniques is how to make this quilt. So I thought we would just go over that today, just some minor stuff. And like I said, this kit will be available on our website for $69.95. So without further ado, I guess we got to get into it. Do you have any comments, Eddie? Anything I got to address?
Gene asked about a Jane Austen panel.
I don't know. There is. I don't know if it's in that kit. I think I've seen it, but I'll have to look into that, Gene. Oh, another thing before I forget. Ladies' Day Out was a big success on Saturday. If you look on our calendar, it is back on the calendar. There's another one coming up end of February. We put that on there because there was a lot of interest in the first one, and it sold out fairly quick. And it went really well, so we're like, well, let's just do it again if everybody enjoyed it. So if you are interested in the Ladies' Day Out, we get started.
Can you ever do it again on a Sunday? 'Cause
We probably could.
yeah, because I would like to do it, but I work Saturdays.
Yeah, we can look at putting it on a Sunday. That's always doable. But yeah, so but right now the one on the calendar is for Saturday. Sunday takes a little bit more planning just because we're usually not open. But anyway, so there's that. So I guess without further ado, let's get started. Right? So first thing you want to do is we're going to cut our panel. Directions on this tell us that we want to cut our panel 33.5 by 39.5. Now this is a question I get a lot from people, you know, because you have to trim a panel up. And one of the problems you have when it comes to trimming a panel is this, we're going to cut this to 33.5 by 39.5. And you know what? Most cutting mats, the largest ones are going to be 36 by 24, which is significantly smaller than this panel. So I was just wanted to show you how I go about trimming these up to size. And I'm even going to do it on this 18 by 24 mat that we have on the table, which is what most people are using at home. The people that are really hardcore have a 24 by 36, which I would recommend to anybody. But for the sake of our sewing badly, we're going to do it on 18 by 24. So if you're just starting out or you've never trimmed panels, you can do it without killing yourself. So without further ado, let's get started cutting. So like I said, the directions tell me that I want to cut this to 33.5 by 39.5. So when you have large dimensions that are significantly larger than, let's talk about a few things. Go to my top down, Eddie. We're going to get into some theory here. All right, so we're top down. When you're cutting, the question that often comes up is, do I measure off of the ruler or do I measure off of the mat? What do you measure off of, Eddie? The ruler, or the okay.
Well, it depends.
What do the audience say? Ruler or mat when we're cutting? Of course, nobody.
I usually do the mat, but I know doing the ruler is better because you've shown me that.
Oh, you're spoiling the fun, but yes, a lot of people. When you first start out, a lot of people tell you to measure off the mat. So if I was going to cut a 2-inch strip as an example, I'm not going to cut this, but I'm just going to show you what a lot of people would do to start. Is you would line up the edge, the straight edge over here, on the edge of your mat. Make sure that's nice and straight, and then you would come over here to the 2-inch mark and cut. Oh, you can't really see them. Okay, the 2-inch. Oh, we'll go up here so you can see the 2-inch mark. This is your 2-inch mark. You line it up here and you cut on the 2-inch mark. Now, the mat is super helpful if I've got to cut like 6 2-inch strips. If I line up to the mat, I just cut at 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. That's one of the upsides to a mat. Even though I'm cutting multiples, I still will not use the mat unless I absolutely have to. I like to use the ruler, which is why my favorite ruler is an 8.5 by 24. Because that means anything under 8.5, I can reference my ruler for cutting and not the mat. Once you get beyond the width of the ruler, you have to cut off the mat. But when you can, I would recommend cutting off of the ruler because you can much more precise. You line up with the edge of the ruler here and cut straight instead of lining up the fabric with the mat and then you have to line the ruler up with the mat. And that's a little bit more movement. I am a big fan of cutting off of the ruler. So, ruler. That's the way to do it. And then there's old school, like when I first learned to quilt years ago, they had those little lip edge rulers, which had the little lip across the bottom that would butt up to the mat to make sure that you were square. And those were never always exactly straight, so you had like these funky cuts. And lip edge rulers, they're still out there, I think, but not a lot of people use them. But when you can, cut off of the ruler. It's going to give you a much more precise cut because you're lining up to the edge of the ruler and cutting on the ruler, so there's fewer moving parts. Whereas if you're lining up to the mat, and then you got to line your ruler up to the mat, there's a lot of stuff that can move. So there's that. And
Gene asked if you ever used the slotted ruler for multiple cuts.
Yes, I have used the slotted rule for multiple cuts. A lot of people swear by them. A lot of people really like them. I have used it. I kind of have mixed feelings on that. Looking at me or are you looking at my hands? Can you click an inset so people have to look at my hands? There we go. Wait. There you go. Woo wee! Look at that. So no, I have used the slotted ruler. I believe the June Taylor shape cuts. A lot of people really like them. They are a good tool. I've used them a bit. One of the problems I have with the shape cut when you're talking about that is I prefer the True Cut Ergo Cut. These don't work as well with those slotted rulers as a regular straight handled rotary cutter, which is probably the biggest reason if I'm doing a lot of kits that I don't use it, because I would rather use this when I'm doing a lot of cutting versus if I've got to choose between this or a slotted ruler, I'm going to choose this because at the end of the day, this makes a bigger difference in my life than a slotted ruler does as far as how my arm feels the next day. So we do have a slotted ruler. I think we have one kicking around here at the shop that some people will use on occasion. They're nice. I tend to think they're a good tool to have, but it's going to be a tool that gets used in a very specific kind of situations more than for me personally. Some people love them, so different. Everybody's got something a little bit different, but for me, they're not a bad tool, but I don't use them a lot. Anybody else have any questions? Yes, Kaya was here on Saturday and she used our shape cut. So, yes. So, the reason I started out with that question is because we're talking about trimming this panel up. But the problem is, if we're going to cut this to 39.5 by 33.5, we don't have a ruler that's wide enough, so we're going to have to use the mat to cut this. But then the other problem is we don't have a mat that's big enough. So what we have to do is actually fold this in half to get our cuts. Now, one of the problems you run into, especially with panels, is they're not always printed straight. So where you might have this fold, the fold up here, that might not be straight where it was on the bolt, and then you might also got some pulling and whatnot when it got wound up. so that your print here might not be perfectly square. That's something to consider when you start cutting panels. One of the things that I will often do first when I'm cutting a panel is the very first thing I will do is most panels are going to have some sort of cut mark on the edges. So I'm going to grab, if you're lucky and it has a line, on this particular panel, this is going to be your salvage edge. So I usually will start on the salvage and just cut straight. Now you can see, I don't know if you can see it on there, but if I line up the edge of my ruler with this panel, you can see this line is not straight here. So that the print is a little funky. I can pull this down to kind of square that up a little bit. And that's all I'm going to do when I first start is I'm just going to kind of pull that down, square that up best I can, because what happens is when these get printed, sometimes they get stretched a little bit and it causes problems. So all I'm going to do is just take off. Now, this can get you in trouble. I would tell you to actually measure this before you start taking stuff off, because if you take too much stuff off, we're not going to have enough to cut this up to the required dimensions in the pattern. And I probably should have measured how big it was before I started cutting and figure out what I'm taking off. But you know, we wouldn't call this sewing badly with Brent if we did everything right. So all I'm doing is I'm actually just cutting this right along that line to take off this little bit of extra. And you'll see why here in just a second. And then as I'm doing it, when I get up to the corners here, I'm going to try and pull this so that it's kind of square. But you can see where this is not even close to square up here. I'm not going to lose a lot of sleep over that. I'm just going to keep taking this salvage edge off. So it takes that off. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And if you have any questions while I'm doing this, just chime right in on the chat. And this, again, you can see, I don't know if you can see that on here. I don't know if it's coming through very well, but this is off by about, from here to here, oops, let me go further up. From here to here on the ruler, there is about a difference in about 1/4 inch. So this is not even really close to square. But I'm going to pull that up and kind of square it off as best I can. But like I said, at the end of the day, it is what it is. I'm just going to start going up the side. And of course, as I get to the midpoint here, I have nothing to compare that square to. So I'm just going to, and this is a 1 yard panel. A lot of panels are 2/3, so it'll be easier to cut and square up because a 2/3 is 24 inches, which is usually about the length of your ruler. So when you're cutting off your salvage, it's just one cut. And again, you can see up here, that we're still, again, we're off by about 1/4 inch from here to here. But I'm not going to lose a whole lot of sleep over that. I'm just going to take that off altogether. Now, we're lucky that on this panel, what we've got is we've got a clear delineation over here. Some panels are just, when they're coming off the bolt on yardage, all you're going to have is like this here. We're lucky here that we have this clear line to go by. So we could just chop this line off. If you have a panel, a lot of panels will actually just continue this color all the way through and you wouldn't have this line here between panels. When that's the case, what I would tell you is go off the edge of your blocks. So if I didn't have this line, I could actually come off the edge of my blocks. I'm going to say, you know, this is 2.5 inches. So if you look here, when I'll line up here to the edge of my blocks and cut out. And on this particular case, we're exactly 2.5 inches off the edge of the block to the edge here. So that's how you would get your initial cut for the panel, is come off the print on the inside if you didn't have this really nice line here to work with. In this case, because we have that line, I'm just going to use that as my guide of what I'm going to chop off for my first initial cut. And again, I'm going to line up to the side, and you're going to see that I am off by a hair still. Again, about 1/4 inch down here from there to there, you're still off by about 1/4 inch. I'm not going to lose a lot of sleep over it because we can pull that all back in here in a minute.
What's the name of the rotary cutter?
That is a true cut rotary cutter. It's like an ergo cut or something like that. I think it's called the ergo cut. And what's nice about it is, if you'll notice, I'm sitting down and doing all this cutting. That's very hard to do with a straight blade, because on a straight blade cutter, you've got to get your arm up in the air. Whereas this one, I can just head straight down. And you can see I'm off a little bit. But so this is one, when you're working with a panel and a pattern like this is probably where most of your The cutting, the worst part of the cutting is getting your panel straightened out. So all I'm doing at this point is I'm just kind of getting rid of all of this outer edge. And what you will find too a lot of times is if you've got a pattern that was specifically developed for a panel, like in this case, you're probably going to find that once you get all of this white stuff trimmed off, it's going to be pretty close probably to where you want to be. And again, we're gonna try and pull this edge in a little bit to square it off. But what you're gonna find is after we get this trimmed, we'll be able to pull those corners square. As we start to sew and add stuff to it, it'll bring it all into compliance. Compliance or submission? All right, there we go. And then we're just gonna finish. Oh, I cut a little too much off there, but whatever. Again, sewing badly with Brent, we're going to live up to the name. So now we have that trimmed up. The question is 33 and a half. Well, what's half of 33 and a half? Anybody?
16.5. Wait. 16.75.
16 3/4. Okay. Remember that time you spent in summer school because you refused to do your statistics homework?
Yeah.
You didn't need that at all for that question. You grew up just fine. So 16 3/4. So what we're going to do now is we're going to fold this in half. And we know, okay, that 16 3/4 is this direction because that's the. So we're going to fold this in half the short way because that's the short measurement. And we're just going to see where we're at. And with a little luck, we'll be like at 16 3/4. But you know what? We're not even close to 16 3/4. We are at 17 1/4. So we fold it in half, and we're at 17 1/4. So how wide is this if it's half of it's 17 1/4?
35. Like 34.5.
35. 35 and a half, right? Wait, no. 17 3/4.
So you said and a half.
You know, so 17 1/4, yeah, 35. You're right, yes. Which makes sense because this panel was 36 inches and we probably cut a 1/4 inch off each side. So we're right at 36 inches. So we have to cut a little off of that. And before we do that, let's check our other dimension. Our other dimension is 39 and a half. So what's half of 39 and a half? You can nudge calculator for that one.
What was it?
Half of 39 and a half.
19.25.
19 3/4.
19.3.
19 3/4. Is that the train platform in Harry Potter?
I don't know.
So 19 3/4, but this is interesting. We are at almost 22. So we've got a lot that we have to cut off. We have a lot that we have to cut off on this side here. So the easiest thing to do at this point, I want to zoom out, Eddie, is we are actually going to measure. We're going to just kind of line up our corners at this point. And what I will often do is I've just got this folded in half. But what I'm going to try and do in this case, because we've got these blocks that are here in the center, these are our blocks, I'm going to try and line up the corner of those blocks as I fold them in half. So this corner here, you can see my finger, this one here, is going to line up with this corner here. And now, you could do this one of two ways. I usually just kind of eyeball it. If you wanted to turn it right sides together, it's much easier to see the corners line up. And that works as well. In fact, since I just did it, I'm going to do that. I'm going to line those corners up best I can. And they should line up pretty close if they're folded in half. But I'm going to the print corners there, and I'm going to try and line the print corner up down here. That's what I'm looking at, is I'm lining up these corners here. That's more important to me than these edges, is the corners, because when we cut this off, we want it to be even on, we want this little bit of border to be even on both sides. So that, it looks about right, and then I'm actually going to fold this in half again, lining up those two corners best I can so that we're down to something about this size here. And then on the same side, we're going to take where you can see the little bit of the print here. I'm going to line that up with this print here, because what we're really concerned about is that when we start chopping, we want to make sure that our panel itself is kind of centered in the middle of our cuts. And I am making a mess of this. You know what? We're not going to do the second fold. We're going to start with one fold, because that's how we roll here. Okay, so we're going to line that up, and we're going to line this up over here. Now, if you were somebody that was really persnickety, you could pin that. But I'm just going to line that up, and I'm going to line that up. And what did we say we wanted our measurement to be at?
I don't remember.
19 3/4? Is that correct?
Yeah.
So now that we're 19 3/4, here's where we're going to check our squareness. If we want to go back to the overhead, if we folded this in half properly, because we lined our corners up, so that means this is our fold here. If we're straight on our fold, you're going to see that the distance from that print to the edge there should be about the same. So we know that we're pretty close to square right there. So we like that. So all we're going to do now is cut this so that we're 19 3/4 long. And all I'm going to do is line that up on the bottom here. And then I'm going to take my measurement. And if you look closely on the edge, this edge is all sorts of wonky because of how not straight this panel was cut. But what you'll notice is I'm straight on the bottom here. If I put my, if I line this up, that should be close enough to straight that we can bring this back in. And all I'm going to do is come up here to my, and double check that my corners are nice. Is anybody saying anything? Am I just boring everybody with this as I talk to myself and try and get this cut?
Somebody said they'd use a pin.
Yes. So now we're going to cut at 19 3/4. And I'm curious because that is what you're going to find is that's almost right up to the edge of the panel here. Which we might change tact here, because it might turn out that we're better off just cutting up to the edge of the panel. But I'm going to turn this way now. Now, because I'm doing this well, actually, no, we'll just do it this way. I'm going to turn this whole thing this way so we can get the 19 3/4 off the side, and I can cut this properly. So we want to make sure when we do this that our fold is straight. This is what's going to keep our panel square. And then I'm just going to come up here, and I'm getting my measurement off of the board and not the ruler. And what I am finding is that 19 3/4, because 19 3/4 times 2 is going to be 39 1/2. What I'm finding is I'm going to cut about 1/4 of an inch. I don't know if you guys can see this. You're cutting about 1/4 to 1/8 of an inch off of your panel blocks there, which is fine. As long as this is straight, we know that we're doing all right. So I'm just going to cut. In worst case scenario, we'll have to stretch this a little bit. And then I'm going to pull it down because like I said, in this case, we're not using the ginormous board. If you have this board at home, this is how you would do this. And I'm going to make sure everything's lined up. Now, I'm also going to now cut at, the problem you're going to run into is you're not going to be able to see your markings on the board, but that's all right. Because all you want to do now is, we're kind of eyeballing this. Now, we could have folded this in half again like I was going to do originally. But what I'm doing now is, because I know I'm folded in half here, I'm matching the amount that we took off there. We're just going to kind of eyeball it. This is lined up because I'm not covering the 3/4. I've got the 3/4 mark down here that I can see. My ruler's lined up nice and straight. I say that and it's not. There we go. And we're just going to cut that. And like I said, there's probably a million different ways to do this. And this might not necessarily be the best way, but this is how I do it. And if you bring it to me and ask for my help, this is what you're going to get.
John,
And it works. What's that?
John asked if it would be easier to alter the pattern.
It might be, but it's not hard. Like I said, this is the worst of it. And if you had the big 24 by 36 board that you're working on, it'd be a lot easier to cut. But I'm using the smaller board as kind of because I know a lot of people have these at home. So that's our first side. So that's 19 and 19 and a half, not 19 and a half. That's 39 and a half that way. And we can check that by, there's 20. And if I wasn't completely wrong, look at that. 20 plus 19 and a half is 39 and a half. Almost like we knew what we were doing. Now we're going to
You're ruining your reputation.
Now we're going to repeat the process going in the other direction. I'm going to fold this in half now. And now I know when I fold this in half that this line here is straight. I'm assuming that because we straightened it on our last cut. So the thing that I'm lining up now is I'm going to line up these panels across the top. And I want to make sure that when I fold this, that this stays nice and straight across the top. All right. And I'm going to look at that, and I see where that's lined up nicely. And then, what did we say? And then again, if you were the type of person that likes to really use pins, you don't have the allergy that I have, you could pin that together. But what we're going to do now is, what did we say that half of 33 and a half was, Eddie?
It was 16.75.
16 and 3/4. Okay, so I'm just going to line this up again. And again, we're kind of using the printed panel as a kind of a little bit of a reference to make sure that everything looks good. But I'm going to match this up here. I'm going to fold this back, and you can see where that's going to have to come back a little bit. I'm trying to match up, I'm just matching up the top of that print to this print here so that it looks centered after we get it cut. And this is going to be a little funky because this is where you're going to see, if we fold this directly in half, you see how we're off a little bit down here? That's because the panel probably wasn't printed square. We're just going to kind of pull it back to where we want it to be. Kind of split that difference a little bit. And then we're going to straighten that all out. And we said what, 17 and 3/4, Eddie?
16.
16 and 3/4. So then we're going to take that and cut that at 16 and 3/4. Now luckily on this particular one, we've got a little bit of, when we cut this, we're going to have a little bit of the extra blue over. So if we're not perfect, it's not the end of the world. It's not like one of the sides is going to be like obviously way worse than the other. That looks good there. And let me just make sure our top looks, we're not even the same ballpark up there. Yeah, okay, there we go. And we're off a hair down here, but we're just going to go with it because we're going to be here all day otherwise. So that's there, 16 and 3/4. I want to put it on 16 and 3/4. And we're just going to go for it. Same thing as what we just did. And we're going to keep that bottom kind of lined up best we can. That's at 16 and 3/4. And you can see that we're running way off up.
Yeah, it's way up at the bottom.
Yeah, it's way off up there, but we're just going to then come down a little bit more. And we're going to fix that fold up here before we continue cutting too much further. Because we don't want to be, oh, let's see, that looks good there. Yeah, that looks a little bit better. And I'm going to drop this on there again. And we're going to do it 16 and 3. And what I'm also using here is because we're off, we're a little funky there, but I'm using the print lines on there lined up with my ruler to give me an idea where I want to be. And then I'm going to come down here and see how far off. Oh, we're way off. Whew. Yeah, this is one of those that the borders are going to hopefully tame the unsquareness of this whole mess. And we're just going to finish that up. 16 and 3/4 we're going to be kind of straight down the side there. And then I'm going to drop my ruler on here. There and there. That looks pretty good. And we'll see how that did for us.
Somebody said, I'm concerned that all the blue border is being cut off.
Yes, on the edges it is cut off because that's what that's what the pattern calls for. And we did run into, because of the little bit of a change there, one of the problems we have is you can see where that's a little funky. And all I'm going to do is straighten that out a little bit and make sure. So all I'm doing now is I'm just going to kind of straighten that out and hope that we're pretty close to it. The measurement here, what I'm looking at, is the same as the measurement here. So that will help kind of straighten that out. And that's just because we didn't do it in one cut. It moved a little on us, but we're good there. And like I said, a quarter inch seam leaves you a lot of room for picking up some of the slop that we've just created. And then a quick measurement of this, 20 plus 13.5 is 33.5, right? So what we're going to find is this is probably not perfectly square because, like I said, it was printed a little wonky. But as we start to add our borders and stuff to it, you're going to find that it's all going to kind of come together. So that the other way that you can cut a panel, that was probably the super complicated pain in the butt way, but that's what you tune in for. The other way that I will often cut a panel too is figure out how much of the edge I need to get the measurements that I want with the panel centered. So what we're probably going to find is that this is probably 2 inches. We could have done some math and figured out that 2 inches top and bottom would have brought us, 2 inches top and bottom brings us into our measurements, and cutting off the edge does it. But yes, you will notice if you look at the actual directions, you'll notice where they show the cutting directions, they do have you cutting off the side borders. So even though it looks a little funky how it happened, that is what the directions call for. So that is how I trim up a panel. Because the dimensions of a panel are well beyond that of my cutting mat, you do have to fold it. And it sometimes helps too ahead of time, if you're not as bad as I am, to starch it and iron it and then actually pull it square before you start cutting, because that will help as well. But for what we're doing, it came out good. And like I said, once we start throwing some borders on it, it's going to be fine. The big thing is that we are meeting the dimensions that the pattern calls for, within 1/8 of an inch, because you can always stretch it if you have to. And the panel is centered left and right, top to bottom. It's not wonky. You don't have like an extra inch on the top or an extra 2 inches on the bottom. It looks fairly centered. So that's how you'd cut a panel. So that takes care of that. That would be the first cut on this particular project. Everybody with me, or has everybody started falling asleep on me? Nobody's sleeping yet. Okay, no other questions. I don't need permission, Gene. I just need your approval. I need your affirmation. Isn't that what social media is all about? Is to get affirmation from everybody else? All right. Now, I was going to get into sewing, but we've not wasted, we spent a lot of time cutting that panel. The other thing on this that is very interesting is, like I said, everything on this quilt is directional except this outer border, which is a directional print. So I did want to cover on how I'm actually going to cut this to be directional so that it matches the rest of the pattern. This is not how it's done in this isn't how it's done in the pattern, but I think it's going to give us a much better finish because, as you can see, I don't want to zoom in on this, Eddie? If I hold my fabric like that, you see how all the horse heads are sideways? That's what the bottom and top, this is what the top and bottom border will look like when I attach this. I want all my heads to be going up and down. And that's a very easy thing to do, and I'm going to show you how to do it. So all you want to do is, did you bring up page 2 of the pattern?
Yeah.
You want to bring that up or put the inset that or whatever. Page 2 of the pattern, you're going to see right underneath the panel there, it shows you the cutting instructions. We're going to cut 5.5 inch strips. You're going to cut 5.5 inch strips with the fabric, is what it says. The problem with that is then all of your horses are going the same direction, but when you do your top and bottom borders, they're going to get turned sideways. So what I'm going to do is, you can take that off there now and focus back on me. What I'm going to do is, instead of taking all of my strips with the fabric, I'm going to take 3 strips that are parallel to salvage. So with the fabric is how you normally strip stuff. Parallel to salvage is exactly what it says. Parallel to salvage. Now, what's nice about this pattern is it calls for 1.25 yards of this print. 1.25 yards will give you a square. So if I go parallel to salvage, those dimensions are going to be pretty much the same as if I went with the fabric, because we have 1.25 yards here. And I know the dimensions of my quilt are somewhere here. They're like 60 by something. But I could look, the overall dimensions of this quilt are 61 by 76, or 67. So that tells me, if I am cutting just regular strips for borders, I'm going to need 3 strips. It's going to be 1.5 strips for each side. So I'm going to have to piece a 1.5 strips to get my side border. So I need 3 strips. So all I'm going to do, before I cut my strips with the fabric, I'm going to cut 3 strips parallel to salvage. And you'll see why here in just a second. So the first cut I'm going to do is going to be to take off my salvage, because nobody wants your salvage on your quilt. So I'm just going to take that off. So salvage is gone. And then I'm going to turn this way. And it calls for 5.5. Am I correct in that? Yes. It wants 5.5 inch strips. So again, we're going to measure off of our ruler. A lot of rulers have 1/2 inch on one side, 1 inch on the other. This is 1/2 inch, so that's 1/2 inch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's 5.5 inches right there. And my fabric is folded in half. So one cut here gives me 2 strips. But I need 3 strips for what we're doing. So what I'm going to do next is unfold this so that we're not doubled up anymore. And you probably could have done this and just done 3 separate strips if you want to do it that way too. But it was easier. And then all I'm going to do now is take that and put this here. And I'm going to line this up really nice. Drop that down, and we're just going to cut another 5.5 inch strip. And slightly, no, we'll just fold it one more time to make our life easy. Keeping that end up. And all I'm going to do now is just cut a 5.5 inch strip off of here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.5. That's lined up. Now, what that's going to do is our borders for the sides now, we have 3 strips. We'll have to piece these for sure. But if you want to zoom in on this now, Eddie. Do you see now how these borders go up and down? So when I put these together, I've got to pay attention to make sure that all my direction goes the same way. But now the side borders are going to go up and down rather than sideways, which is going to look really weird on this, which I didn't want to do on this quilt because everything is so directional. But what that does to our pattern is the problem now, if we now strip our, here we go, let's go back on the fold. So if we now start stripping this like we normally would, you're going to see that we are actually missing 15 inches off of here. We're 15 inches shorter from here to here. So what that means is we're going to have to piece together a couple extra strips so that we are now long enough. Rather than doing a strip and a half to get our to have enough width for our borders, we're probably going to have to do probably 2 or 2.5 strips. But there's plenty of fabric here to do this, because all we did is we're just cutting a little bit different, and I'll just show you real quick what I'm talking about. So I'm just going to cut, here's 5.5 here, and we'll do another 5.5 here. And like I said, we're gonna so if you did do this, if you're making this quilt and you did decide to do this, what this is going to mean is that you're going to have to do a little bit of extra piecing. But here, you're going to see what I'm talking about. So if this is our bottom border, you can see the horses go that way. We're going to have to do a couple extra pieces to piece so we get enough length on it now. But the upside is, even though I'm lazy and don't want to sew, I do care about the art sometimes. Do you see now how all these horses are going in the same direction? And if we hadn't taken these strips off first, all of our horses would be going this way, and those would look funny on the side because you see how they're sideways over here. So that's the only difference I would make to this pattern as it's written. It's a very easy change to make, and the only extra work you're going to have from it is you're going to have to piece an extra. You may have to put an extra strip in, because these strips are going to be a little bit shorter because we took this out of it before we cut these strips. So that's the only changes. That's the other changes I would make to this particular pattern. Yes. Okay. Does that make sense? I know I didn't do any sewing today. I thought I was going to get into more sewing. Trimming up the panel took way longer than I thought, but I guess it was good entertainment. What I really did want to get into though was I did want to cover the borders on this, because this pattern is very easy to change what we just did on the borders, so that all your horse heads now go all the directional prints are going in the right direction. The rest of your prints are also directional, but the way that this pattern goes together with your strips, it's very easy to keep everything going in the right direction. Just pay attention. The big thing that, I don't want to say bothered me, but the big thing that I thought would really improve this would be to have your side panels, the side border, your outer border sides, that all the horses are going the same way. If that outer border was just kind of a toss prints with no directionality to it, I wouldn't go through that extra step. But in this case, it'll make a nice difference because everything will go the way it's supposed to. But my suspicion is I went through all that trouble, and what I'm going to find is like one of my extra pieces, I've got a piece on the bottom, is going to get turned upside down, and that's just the way these things happen to me. Yes. We good, Eddie?
I think so.
Did you all get something out of this? There wasn't a whole lot of sewing. A lot of bad things, but not a lot of sewing. And then, like I said, as far as trimming panels, there's a couple different ways to do it. The way I showed you today is the way I'll use a lot. It just, especially if I don't have border. When you have borders to work with, you can kind of center it and use the print, but sometimes it's just fold it in half and get your dimensions and go. That panel is going to be a little skewed, but once we start sewing our borders on and stuff, it should pull everything back into square. And I think that's everything I got. Did we have anything, Eddie?
I don't think so.
You didn't have anything? Okay. So these kits the Whimsical West kits will be available online. They'll be $69.95. I don't know if we've got the Jane Austen ones up yet, but those are going to be, I want to say right around $200. But there's a lot of fabric there, and it's a gorgeous quilt. That quilt comes out, it's like a 90 by 108. It's a big quilt, and it's gorgeous. And then with the Meadowmere, we'll get something thrown together with that. Oh, before I forget, I totally forgot, Eddie. One of the few times that my sewing project got done in the week. So remember the mess we were making last week with the panel? This is what it came out like. And it's all quilted up, ready to go. That was the quick panel throw available on our website. Like I said, all said and done, you're into this thing for about $30, maybe $35 for the materials on the top. Downloads free. And Brenda was nice enough to get the binding on. I was just going to show it without the binding. And she's like, no, it looks better with the binding. So she threw it on there for me this morning. But there you go. That was last week's project. Maybe we'll get the Whimsical West done so you can see what that looks like done. But anyway, I think that's all we've got. Thanks for all for joining. And like, share, subscribe, all that stuff as we try to get, like, I don't know, what are we shooting? What do we have for subs? Are we up to, like, what are they?
675.
600, so we want to get to 700. Anyway, like, share, subscribe. I appreciate y'all watching. And hopefully Becky will be back next week, so it'll be a lot more educational than me just rambling about how I mess things up. I'll go wake up, John. Yes. Thanks for watching. Sew on and be excellent to each other.